Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, praise be to God and prayers and peace be upon the messenger of God, his family, his companions, and those who follow him. O God, there is nothing easy except what you make easy, and you make sorrow easy if you will. O God, teach us what benefits us and benefit us with what you have taught us and increase us in knowledge. O God, make all our deeds purely for your noble countenance and do not let anyone else have any share in them, O Lord of the worlds. Welcome, dear.
في هذا المجلس على طاعته أن يجمعنا في جنته ومستقر رحمته ودار كرامته. وهذا المجلس الخامس والأربعون من مجالس السيرة النبوية على صاحبها أفضل الصلاة والسلام. ونبدأ
Friends, may your steps be blessed, and may you have a place in paradise. We ask God, the blessed and exalted, just as he has gathered us in this gathering for his obedience, to gather us in his paradise, the abode of his mercy and the home of his honor. This is the fifth of the 4 sessions on the Prophet's biography. Upon its owner be the best of prayers and peace. We begin music by renewing our congratulations, blessings, and prayers for our Mujahideen brothers in Syria for what God has granted them. We spoke last week and they were on the outskirts of Aleppo. Now, God willing, perhaps as I speak now, they have entered Homs. We ask God, the blessed and exalted, that we come next week and they will have conquered Damascus. This is the moment when we truly know the future of this battle. As we mentioned in our discussions of the Prophet's biography, the capital is the decisive battleground, the turning point. The capital is to the state as the heart is to the body. If it is sound, the whole body is sound, and if it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. The occupation remains incapable of winning the battle until it enters the capital, and the revolution remains incapable of winning the battle until it liberates the capital. If a tyrant loses the entire country but clings to the capital, he is not truly lost. I ask God Almighty to liberate Damascus, and I ask him to liberate Cairo afterward and to liberate all our capitals. This is the moment every Muslim longs for and hopes for. I have no doubt that if Cairo and Damascus in particular are liberated, then liberation from Zionism is only a matter of time. I urge you and myself to pray for your brothers in Syria and not to forget the conquests taking place in Syria in the southern part of the country. Blessed Gaza is suffering massacres and atrocities, and what is happening in beloved Sudan is a tragedy. Sudan's tragedy is also a tragedy, not less but greater than the tragedy of Gaza. Sudan has 7 million displaced people, more than 3 times the number in Gaza. Of course, the situation in Sudan is very dire, and the worst part of Sudan's misery is that they lack wise leadership. In the end, you are talking about Gaza, which has a wise and dedicated leadership, and you are talking about Syria. Now Syria, praise be to God, is making progress, which also indicates the presence of wise leadership. As for Sudan, it is unfortunate that the conflict between them is a conflict between evil and the lesser of 2 evils. But I ask God to grant his Mujahideen servants in Sudan a victory from him, and to provide them with a leader in a way that pleases God and his messenger. I urge you to pray for our Muslim brothers. We will continue what we started in the previous session of the Prophet's biography. We mentioned in a previous session that Medina was a state, or if it were in a situation that were it placed now, before any leader of the Islamic movement would have said, music, it is impossible to ignore the problems and the multitude of divisions within it, political problems, religious problems, economic problems, and even health problems. We mentioned this, and I believe I mentioned the hadith of Aisha, may God be pleased with her, that when we migrated to Medina, it was the most plague-ridden land on earth, meaning the most plague-ridden land on earth, and the valley of Buthan flowed with stagnant, putrid water. This was one of the things that caused the epidemics, so the situation in Medina was very difficult. Nevertheless, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, accepted the pledge of allegiance from the Muhajirin and the Ansar and established his state in Medina. We mentioned that we must focus and pause financially with the first measures taken by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in Medina, because these measures guide and direct us on what we should do if we have the opportunity to liberate Islamic land or establish an Islamic society and an Islamic State. We mentioned that the first of these measures were 4. We talked about building the first mosque. We talked about brotherhood between the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Number 2, and we discussed in the last session the writing of the Constitution of Medina, which many contemporaries prefer to call the Constitution of Medina. We will, God willing, complete the remaining procedures in future sessions. But for now, we have not yet finished with the issue of the Constitution of Medina. In truth, I believe that the Constitution of Medina contains meanings and lessons that we should consider, understand, and thoroughly digest, for this is the secret of the Islamic State, the secret of the Islamic society. This document, written by our Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is a precious and essential document that tells us how the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, began managing a very difficult, highly critical and deeply divided situation in order to establish the best nation ever brought forth for mankind. This document requires examination, focus, study, and a thorough understanding of its lessons and wisdom. We discussed in the last session that this document in its entirety reaches the level of Hasan, good, and some of its chains of transmission are authentic. We also mentioned that some scholars have discussed whether it could be one document or two. A document to regulate work with Muslims, a document to regulate work with Jews, but historians and biographers usually conflate these. These matters are of little benefit to dwell on. The content that should be emphasized is that this document in its first clauses declared the establishment of the Muslim nation, the establishment of the Muslim nation, and that the Muhajirin and Ansar from Yathrib and those who followed them and joined them constitute a nation distinct from other people. This formation of the Muslim nation and the elevation of the Islamic bond above all other bonds does not mean breaking or destroying the existing bonds in society. Rather, we have seen how the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, dealt with social groups as social forces. He did not seek to break them or destroy them, but rather benefited from their strength in managing society, ensuring its security and safety, and confronting those who violate this document or who commit injustice, sin, and crime. He said, he will only bring ruin upon himself, his family, and his people. Break, ruin means destruction, as we mentioned, so if anyone has forgotten these matters or they have faded from their mind, I urge them to refer back to the council. The past, because we talked about what was between the Muslims and we started talking about what was with the Jews, who were a religious, social, and economic bloc in Medina. Okay, so we started with clause 24, that the Jews should contribute to the expenses of the believers as long as they are at war. Here is something I will briefly mention now, and then, God willing, we will discuss it further when we talk about the obligation of zakat. We mentioned last time that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, benefited from social blocks, and that he did not establish military or police forces, nor did he establish a centralized state. A centralized state takes people's money and employs people and thus manages all affairs and problems. We mentioned that the Islamic State's model of structure is completely different from the modern state. The Islamic State cares about a cohesive society. It cares about these tribal and social blocks and invests their strength in solving these problems and managing people's affairs. This relieves the burden on the state and gives society strength and cohesion, and society is often more
أقدر على الحل من الدولة.
capable of solving problems than the state. Okay, here you will find that, when we come to this point, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, did not impose taxes. We will learn later that imposing taxes is a major sin in Islam, so
من الكبائر في الإسلام. فرض الضرائب من الكبائر في الإسلام.
how did the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, spend on the state's needs? Also with these social groups and this Islamic spirit. Therefore, the first hadith or sermon the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, delivered was, "O
لذلك كان أول حديث أو أول خطبة خطبها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: أيها الناس أطعموا الطعام وأفشوا السلام وصلوا الليل
people, feed the hungry, spread peace and pray at night while people are asleep." So why didn't the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, ask the people of Medina for taxes? Because the idea of taxes indicates the centralization of power, the inflation of authority, and the overreach of the
تغول الجهاز المالي.
financial apparatus. God willing, if God grants us life and the opportunity to meet again, we will have a lengthy discussion on the issue of zakat and the issue of money in the Islamic State. What we want to say here is that the Prophet did not ask the Jews for financial support except in one case, the state of
نفقة إلا في حالة واحدة وهي حالة الحرب.
war, when danger is imminent for this homeland, this state, this society. At that time, it is incumbent upon the Jews, just as it is upon the Muslims, to contribute. Okay, so the Jews will spend with the believers as long as they are at
تمام. وأن اليهود ينفقون مع المؤمنين ما داموا محاربين.
war. Okay, and we will store this information until we can elaborate on it later, God willing, in the next section. And the Jews of Banu Auf are a community of believers. The Jews have their religion and the Muslims have theirs, their allies and themselves, except for those who commit injustice and sin, for they will not be destroyed except themselves and their families.
لا يهلك إلا نفسه وأهل بيته. وذكر بعد ذلك: وإن اليهود بني النجار مثل ما.
He then mentioned that the Jews of Banu Najjar are like the Jews of Banu Auf, the Jews of Banu Harith are like the Jews of Banu Auf, and the Jews of Banu Saida are like the Jews of Banu Auf. We mentioned that in this distribution there are 3 lessons we can learn. The first lesson, which I will repeat, is that the Prophet did not break the
أن النبي لم يكسر الروابط القائمة الموجودة وتعامل مع هذه الكتل
existing bonds and dealt with these groups as existing forces in society. The second matter is this gradual approach to legislation, and that all matters remain as they are. We mentioned that there is an important difference between the moment of establishing the state. This is a moment where gradualism is not beneficial, rather gradualism is destructive. This is a
هذه لحظة فارقة بتعبير شيخنا وسيدنا الشيخ حازم أبو إسماعيل.
pivotal moment, in the words of our Sheikh and Master, Sheikh Hazem Abu Ismail, may God release him from captivity. But the application of Sharia is gradual, and to the best of one's ability, things remain as they are. The third point is that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, in these provisions had a parallel end.
كان فيها نظير وشبيه بتنظيم مجتمع المؤمنين.
Similarity to the organization of the community of believers, Banu al-Harith, Banu Jusham and Banu Saida. All of these, as I mentioned, had their rights. Here meaning, the Jews, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, treated them with equality, which the jurists summarize in their famous principle: they have the same rights as us and they have the same obligations as us. We will
ما علينا على تفصيل سنأتي إليه إن شاء الله.
elaborate on this shortly, God willing. But don't forget these 3 lessons we are discussing: the issue of gradualism, the issue of utilizing existing social groups and not breaking them up, and the issue of the parallel and similarity between the rights of the
ومسألة مناظرة ومشابهة حقوق اليهود لحقوق المسلمين. لكن الجديد
Jews and the rights of the Muslims. But the new point here which we should pay attention to is that you are now hearing about the Jews of Banu Auf, the Jews of Banu Haritha, Banu al-Harith, the Jews of Banu Saida and the Jews of Banu Jusham. You hear these, and soon we will hear about other Jewish groups, Banu Qurayza, Banu Nadir and Banu Kainuka. These Jews, my friends, this is a story we must understand. We mentioned that the people of Medina were idolaters. We mentioned that they knew the Jews were people of the book, possessing knowledge from the scriptures and prophets. These idolaters
أن اليهود أهل كتاب عندهم علم من الكتاب لهم أنبياء. فهم أهل المدينة أصحاب الأوثان
saw the Jews as superior to them, and this perception intensified when the Jews said, "The time of a prophet is near whom God will soon send to us, and we will be killed by him as the people of Ad and Aram were killed." Sometimes, as happens even now in our societies, a woman, if she gave birth to a son and he died, or if she didn't give birth at all, would pray to God that if she had a son who lived or was blessed with one, she would raise him as a Jew. This sometimes happens in our countries and villages. You find the most religious people saying, "If I have a son, I will dedicate him to God." In the past, in Egypt, they would say, "I will make him a sheikh, I will take him to Al-Azhar." Some people go to sorcerers and some go to priests. This is a social phenomenon. For example, in Egypt, Egypt has a number of shrines like those of Sayyid al-Badawi, al-Shadhili, and al-Mursi Abu al-Abbas. You find people, and of course there are the shrines of Al-Hussein and the shrines of the saints and the Al-Bayt. You find people sometimes writing their complaints and petitions saying, "Oh my master Al-Hussein, if my son lives, let him be your servant at the shrine." Some people even go to the shrines. Even in Egypt, some ignorant Muslims used to go to churches to the Virgin Mary. These places were also frequented by ignorant Muslims. The people of Medina used to do this with their children, making them Jewish. When Islam came, the people of Medina, after converting to Islam, wanted to take their children back from Judaism. So, God, may he be blessed and exalted, revealed, "There is no compulsion in religion. Righteousness has become distinct from error." Therefore, Jewish communities arose around the homes of the Arabs in Medina. These were the people and those who allied with them and those who supported them. This was a natural social movement. But here, consider that the verse, "There is no compulsion in religion," was revealed to prevent Muslims from forcing their children to return to Islam. This is a level of sophistication that humanity has never known. This is an important matter. And, after the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, listed the wealth of the Jews, and the clause concerning their people here is important, namely that none of them, meaning the Jews, may leave except with Muhammad's permission. This implies a stipulation or decree that the Jews may not leave Medina without prior permission from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Scholars have paused to consider this clause. I heard from some of our sheikhs, may God preserve them, that they interpreted the phrase, "none of them may leave," to mean that they may not fight each other. Leaving here implies fighting, meaning they may not kill or fight each other. In my opinion, this interpretation is far-fetched. Even though the wording is open to interpretation, the most likely interpretation, and God knows best, is that they may not leave Medina. There are several possibilities here. Firstly, to prevent them from inciting violence against the Muslims after the enmity had begun. This clause aligns with the view that the Jewish documents were written after the Battle of Badr, which is plausible. Regarding the part of this document pertaining to the Jews, there is scholarly disagreement about its date. We have an authentic hadith stating that it was written after Badr, after the killing of Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf. However, some scholars say it was written upon the Prophet's arrival in Medina. Scholars reconcile these two accounts by stating that it was a document written upon the Prophet's arrival in Medina, and then Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf tore it up. Ashraf was killed and his people came to renew this pact, so another document was written between them and the Prophet. The matter remains as if it were a renewal, confirmation, and documentation of a pact written previously. This
فهذا البند يرجح قول القائلين بأنه كتب بعد بدر هو
clause
قول
supports the view that it was written after Badr. It is the Prophet's statement, peace and blessings be upon him, that none of them should leave Medina except with Muhammad's permission. This was to prevent the Prophet from several things, including inciting them against him, as Kaba ibn al-Ashraf did, and from them entering into alliances with tribes outside Medina or engaging in
يخوضوا حروبا خارج المدينة فيحصل ما نسميه
wars outside Medina, which would lead to what we call in modern terms the entanglement of the Islamic State, since these people were part of it. Therefore the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, imposed upon them the prohibition of leaving except with permission. Now a contemporary question arises, is this a form of persecution and oppression of the Jews? What do you think, good people? Let's ask the contemporary question in another way. Now, does anyone have the right to leave their country without permission, right or not? Everyone leaves with permission now, right?
صح ولا لا؟ الناس كلها الآن تخرج بإذن، صحيح؟ ويعني وإذا لم تأذن لك الدولة كنت على
And if the state doesn't grant you permission, are you on arrival watch lists or no fly lists? You can leave, yet people don't see this system as oppressive. No one can leave the country without permission, so how can it be in a state of
فكيف بحالة حربية أو حالة يخشى منها أن تؤدي إلى
war, or a situation that might lead to war? I mean, whoever sees this clause as restrictive should realize that the entire modern world has adopted this clause for everyone, that no one can leave without permission.
على الناس
The
جميعا وأنه لا يخرج أحد منهم إلا بإذن. طيب البند الذي بعده
next clause states that no one is prevented from seeking revenge for a wound, and that whoever kills, kills himself and his family except for those who have been wronged. And God is the most just. This clause
يعني هذا البند يعالج بعض ما كان في الزمن الجاهلي من أنه
addresses some of the issues that existed in pre-Islamic times, where some people you know, and perhaps some of you, if you were close to a tribal or clan environment, if one of them was killed, they would say, we need 10, 5, 20, or
10 أو 5 أو 20 أو 70 بحسب كل وبعضهم إذا جرح منه أحد فإنه
70 to avenge him, depending on the individual, and if one of them was wounded, they would seek revenge because of the wound or the wound itself. This clause restores this equality, and that no one is prevented from seeking revenge. A
على ثأر جرح وأنه من فتك يعني من خالف هذا
wound upon a wound, and whoever commits murder, meaning whoever violates, this will be responsible for himself and his family except for the oppressed, and God is the most righteous. This means that God and the believers are pleased with this. The next clause is complete. The Jews are responsible for their expenses, and the
وإن بينهم النصر على من حارب
Muslims are responsible for their expenses. They will support each other against whoever fights against the people of this document. They will advise and counsel each other and act righteously, without sin. This is clear. The principle is that the Jews' money is spent. The Jews are responsible for their own expenses, and the Muslims are responsible for their own expenses. This
هذا يعيدنا إلى مسألة إنه الدولة الإسلامية ليست
brings us back to the issue that the Islamic State is not a state that collects money or imposes taxes. Rather, society and social groups manage their own affairs. If these social groups are unable to do so for a time, the state intervenes with surplus funds or with zakat, charity, and other sources. However, the principle is that
أن الناس يكفي
people are self-sufficient. No one will be held accountable for an ally.
طيب وأنه لا يأثم امرؤ بحليفه
And victory belongs to the oppressed. This does not deviate from what we mentioned earlier regarding this matter. Victory for the oppressed means
من مسألة النصر للمظلوم بمعنى أن الإسلام رفع معنى الحق ورفع أخوة الدين
That
فوق
Islam elevated the meaning of justice and the
القبلية
brotherhood of faith, above the tribal and sectarian bonds of pre-Islamic ignorance which caused men to rise up against one another out of tribalism and prejudice. This is as Allah Almighty says, O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and
الوالدين والأقربين. الآية الأخرى يا أيها الذين آمنوا
relatives. Another verse says, O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives. And another verse says, O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives. And do not let hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just, that is nearer to righteousness. Do not let hatred of a people prevent you means do not let the hatred or animosity of a people prevent you from being just. The first verse is a verse in Surah and Nisa the women, because part of Surah and Nisa deals with the management of internal family affairs, inheritance, shares, the weak, and orphans. So Allah, blessed and exalted is He, drew attention to internal family relationships, saying, Be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives. The second surah, Surah Al-Ma'idah, the table spread, mostly deals with the relationship with those who differ, the Jews and Christians. Therefore it is fitting that Allah Almighty says, And let not the hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just, that is nearer to righteousness. Okay, clear everyone now. The
تمام؟ واضح يا جماعة الخير؟ طيب.
next clause, and that Yathrib is a sanctuary for the people of this document. This clause, if we try to put it in contemporary language, means that
يعني هذا البند أنا لو حاولنا أن نصوغه بلغة معاصرة يعني نقول بأنه يثرب يلتزم كل الناس فيها بعدم مخالفة القانون.
everyone in Yathrib is obligated to abide by the law, not to commit a crime, not to commit a sin, not to commit injustice. The root of the word haram, forbidden, is harama, sanctity. A sacred land is a land where its birds are not hunted and its trees are not uprooted. And
تمام؟ وقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كل المسلم على المسلم
the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, Every Muslim is inviolable to another Muslim in his blood, his wealth, and his honor. So this clause is a directive to the people of this land. Here it's a national address. Pay attention, a national address in the contemporary sense that Yathrib is a sanctuary for the people of this
لأهل هذه الصحيفة. وإن الجار كالنفس غير مضار ولا آثم.
document, and that the journey is like the journey itself, without harm or sin, and that no one may enter its sanctuary except with the permission of its people. This addresses what might happen.
على أحد أو أن يجير أحد حرمة أحد. تمام؟
This document establishes these boundaries to prevent the recurrence of problems. No one may grant protection against another, nor may anyone violate the sanctity of another's property except with the permission of its owners. Any dispute or conflict that arises
وإنه ما كان بين أهل هذه الصحيفة من حدث أو
among the people of this document, the resolution of which is feared, shall be referred to God and to Muhammad, the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. Pray for the Prophet. If we were to discuss this clause in
هذا البند لو جلسنا فيه 5 مجالس لن نوفيه. فسنقول كلاما مركزا مختصرا.
5 sessions, we would not be able to do it justice. Therefore we will speak concisely and clearly, requiring your full attention and focused minds. Pray for the Prophet. Any dispute or conflict that arises among the people of this document, consider it a crime, though the term is broader, or any conflict that is feared, the resolution of which is
أعم من هذا لكن اعتبروها الجريمة. أو اشتجار يخاف فساده.
referred to God and to Muhammad, the messenger of God. Now let's first tell a simple story. Before the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, came to Medina, we had Jewish communities. The most prominent of these communities was called Banu Nadir, and there was a smaller community
أعز كتلة يهودية كان اسمها بني النضير. وفي كتلة أقل منها شوية كان اسمهم بنو قريظة.
called Banu. The Banu Qurayza, because of their power, wealth, and large numbers, used to impose on the Banu Qurayza that the blood money for a slain Banu Qurayza was equivalent to a slain Banu Qurayza, that is, a
بقتيلين منهم. يعني بني النضير الرجل منهم برجلين من ايه؟
man from the Banu Nadir was worth 2 men, from the Banu Qurayza. This was the prevailing law. Of course, this was the prevailing law. Nowadays, hundreds of thousands of dirhams are not worth a single man of the gentle white race or the gentle Zionist race.
الجنس الابيض اللطيف او الجنس الصهيوني اللطيف. سمعتوا انتوا التصريحات بتاعت
Have you heard the statements of the judge of the International Criminal Court when she said that some members of the Security Council threatened us with arrest or carried out an arrest warrant because, as they say, the court, he was saying that, the court had overstepped its jurisdiction and exceeded its limits. This court was created, and Karim Khan was saying that.
المحكمة دي معمولة وكريم خان كان بيقول كده بيقول أخبرني أحد القادة الأوروبيين.
One of the European judges told him that this court was created for, what, for Africans, for Putin? But when you talk about Netanyahu and such, where are you going? For al-Bashir, for example. Okay, so, Sheikh Dr. Abdul Aziz Rantes, may God have mercy on him, often cited. The poet says no.
الدكتور عبد العزيز رنتيس رحمه الله كثيرا ما يستشهد بقول الشاعر لا قول للحق الضعيف ولا صدى. لا قول للحق الضعيف ولا صدى. لا رأي للحق الضعيف ولا صدى، والرأي رأي القاهر الغلاب. لا عدل إلا إن تعادلت القوى وتصادم الإرهاب بالإرهاب. هذا هو. أتحن عليك قلوب الورى إذا دمع عينيك يوما جرى؟ وهل يرحم الحمل المستضام ذئاب الفلا وأسود الشرى؟ لقد سمع النسر نوح الحمام. الحمام الضعيف الوديع اللذيذ، لقد سمع النسر نوح الحمام فلم يعفو عنه ولم يعذره. هكذا الدنيا يا جماعة الخير، هكذا الدنيا، إلا في ظل العدل، في ظل العدل الرباني. هكذا الدنيا. فهنا خلاص الوضع مستقر على إنه الرجل من قريظة من بني النضير برجلين من بني قريظة، حتى جاء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فأرادت بنو قريظة أن، طبعا الوضع السياسي اتغير، القانون والنظام اتغير دلوقتي في مظلة عادلة، فذهبوا فرفضوا أن يدفعوا دية قتيل بقتيلين، فاحتكموا إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. وهنا نزل قول الله تعالى: وكتبنا عليهم فيها، يعني في التوراة، أن النفس بالنفس والعين بالعين والأنف بالأنف.
An eye for an eye, and wounds are subject to retaliation. This is the position of the
هذا الموقف الدولة الإسلامية تترك غير المسلمين يحتكمون إلى
Islamic State. It allows non-Muslims to refer to their own laws in matters that arise between them unless resorting to their own laws leads to a dispute or quarrel that is feared to be corrupt. For example, if a
تمام، يعني مثلا يهودي سرق من يهودي،
Jew steals from another Jew and both agree to have the rabbi judge between them, they are free to do so. However, if a
لكن يهودي
Jew steals from another Jew in the public sphere pertaining to the Islamic State, then no, that is, if both
تمام، يعني ما كان طرفاه من غير المسلمين
parties are non-Muslims and both agree to be judged according to their own laws, then the Islamic State judges them according to those laws. But if something transcends this private internal situation and enters the
هذه الحالة الخاصة والحالة الداخلية إلى المجتمع،
public sphere, what they call the public sphere, the sphere of law and politics, then its ultimate authority is with God and Muhammad, the messenger of God. Here the Sharia judges between them marriage, divorce, inheritance. As long as both parties agree to be judged according to our Sharia, we do.
ميراث طالما الطرفين مرتضيين يتحاكموا إلى لا نحكم بينهم إلا
not judge between them unless they or one of them requests to be judged according to our Sharia. This situation in reality is not permitted by.
هذا البند على الحقيقة وهذا الوضع على الحقيقة لا تسمح به أكثر الدول العلمانية المعاصرة.
Most modern secular states, people resort to their religious laws in their affairs because the secular state, the modern state sees that what constitutes the state's presence, its existence, its sovereignty is its ability to apply laws to individuals.
الدولة هو قدرتها على تطبيق القوانين على الأفراد. أحد التعريفات المشهورة عند الجماعة القانونيين.
One of the well-known definitions among legal scholars is that if a state is unable to apply the law to individuals, then the state has entered a state of weakness, corruption, and failure. Okay, someone might ask me, does this mean that an Islamic state has more than one legal system? The short answer, which requires a detailed explanation, is yes, it's possible. Many Islamic states had judges representing the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence, and you choose the school you follow. But, Sheikh, this might cause a kind of chaos. No, it doesn't cause chaos except in major public matters. These major public matters are decided by the ruler, and that's why scholars say the ruler's interpretation. Disagreements arise in major public matters where differing opinions necessitate a resolution. This is because the concept of the ruler, specifically the guardian of the community, the Muslim guardian, is often misunderstood in contemporary Islamic culture. The Muslim guardian, who rules according to Sharia law through his independent reasoning ijtihad, resolves the dispute. So the first point we derive from this is the nature of the Islamic State, which allows people of the book and those who disagree to abide by their own laws as long as it doesn't involve a neighbor whose corruption is feared. Secondly, we must emphasize the necessity of a legitimate religious authority, the necessity of Sharia law, the necessity of a governing Sharia, and the necessity for Islamic Sharia to be the supreme authority, the ruling law. No country, my friends, can function without a religious authority. There isn't one, and it's not feasible. Even modern states that consider themselves tolerant cannot operate without it. So I want to tell you that the prevailing view among intellectuals and many Muslims is that the Islamic State, a despotic state that applies Sharia law while secular states maintain neutrality between religions. This is a myth. Every country has a constitution, and this constitution determines the governing authority. A constitution that determines the governing authority is inherently biased. Monarchies, for example, are inherently monarchical. If you were in a monarchy and said you wanted to establish a republic and overthrow the monarchy, would you be allowed to do so under the guise of freedom of expression, or would you be violating the Constitution? Now imagine a republic where you admire the royal family that existed before the republic, or where you yourself would like to be king. Would republics allow you to call for the restoration of the monarchy? Similarly, would a capitalist state allow the establishment of secret organizations working to reinstate communism? The same applies to a communist state. Every country has its governing authority. This governing authority is biased towards a set of values, a set of principles enshrined in the Constitution, which everyone is obligated to uphold whether they like it or not, and they are held accountable for their adherence. It also has the same meaning. Here we Muslims have no reference point except Islam. As Sheikh Qaradawi, may God have mercy on him, said, it is backward for Islam to rule in a people who see Islam as the greatest religion. God's law, the law of Muhammad, is more important to us than
شرعي نابليوني.
Napoleon's law, so there must be a reference point, there must be a constitution. This constitution represents a bias, and this bias does not accept violating the constitution, it does not accept going against the system. So what I want to say is, no matter how much we talk about Islam's tolerance towards minorities, and it truly is, this tolerance does not mean that the state has lost its reference point, lost its bias, lost its legislative authority, lost its ability to govern. Rather, if there is any disagreement or dispute among the people of this document and there is fear of corruption, then its resolution is, to God and to Muhammad, the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and that neither the merchants of Quraysh nor those who support them, this is a new clause, nor the merchants of Quraysh nor those who support them. If we want to phrase this in contemporary terms, it warns against dealing with the enemies of the state in the event of war. It is a natural clause, of course. I mean, no state accepts that some of its groups or parties deal with the state that is at war with them, and that victory between them over whoever attacks Yathrib, meaning between the Muslims and the Jews over whoever attacks Yathrib. This is, of course, one of the duties of minorities, and if they are called to peace, they should make peace with them and abide by it. And if they are called to something similar, then they have a right over the believers, except for those who fight in the religion. This means that each side of the believers and the Jews has a right to make peace with the allies of the other side, except for those who fight in the religion, and the clause before it made an exception for those who were excluded from the Quraysh. This is good and kind for all people. This is in defense, meaning in the defense of the city. Each people has their share from their side, that is, each group undertakes the defense and protection from their side, and the Jews of Oz, their allies and themselves are on the same basis as the people of this document, with pure righteousness from the people of this document, and that righteousness is not earned by anyone except for himself, and God is the most truthful and righteous of what is in this document, confirming the previous clauses, and that this document does not prevent an oppressor or sinner from breaking the law, meaning whoever breaks the law. The agreement does not prevent his people from uniting behind him. This document does not prevent any oppressor or sinner. Whoever leaves is safe, and whoever stays is safe in the city, except for those who oppress and sin. God is the protector of those who are righteous and God-fearing, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. So let's pray for the Prophet. The document has 47 articles, and its articles have ended. However, the matter requires much commentary, lessons, and insights gained from this document. Let's pray for the Prophet. Of course, you remember when we said that the city was full of problems. This document is an example of how, when this document was written and governed the society of Medina, the society of Medina quickly transformed into a harmonious, cohesive, and thriving society. This is the first proof that there is no society in which God's law cannot be applied, because a society full of problems with its collapse, health crises, conflicting and different groups and intertwined relationships, all of this could be resolved with the existence of this document. This is the clearest proof that if the Sharia reforms a society that was in this state of division and fragmentation, then it is more effective than any other. Firstly, it is suitable for all societies, no matter how dire their circumstances. Therefore, if we grasp any doubt or pretext used by those who oppose the implementation of Sharia, we will find a parallel in the society of Medina. For example, someone might say you can't implement Sharia because
الشريعة علشان في ناس مش مسلمين في البلد. ما هي المدينة كان
There are
فيها
non-Muslims in the city, but Medina itself had non-Muslims, Jews, and polytheists. Another argument is you can't implement Sharia because we have economic crises and need, tourism, alcohol, immodesty, dancing, films, and television series. Medina's economy was weak, and as we see, the people of Medina, despite their utmost
أهل المدينة على كل ما أوتوا من بذل ومن إخلاص أن يستوعبوا كل
effort and dedication could not accommodate all the needs of the city's inhabitants. Some people lacked shelter, clothing, and even food. These were the people of the Sufa. Every argument raised on this subject has a parallel in Medina. Therefore, our
شيئا من نظائر هذه الشبهة. يبقى أول ما نستدل به أن الشريعة صالحة
first proof is that Sharia is suitable for reforming all, no matter how dire a society's situation may be. That's the first thing. The second thing, my friends, is this: let's consider it a test. Let's consider it a test.
هذا خلينا نعتبره اختبار. ما نعتبره اختبار. الآن إذا خيرت طبعا هو محدش بيخير حد في أمور
Now, if you were given a choice, of course, no one gives anyone a choice in matters of politics, power, and war, but what we want to say is if you were given a choice between a secular constitution ruled by a devout Muslim, meaning a secular constitution but with a devout ruler, and an Islamic constitution ruled by a secular ruler, which is better, an Islamic constitution ruled by a secular ruler, okay, that's a choice. Does anyone have another choice? Yes, no, I'm not saying both are good, we agree on that, but I want to say now that some evils are lesser than others. Sometimes you choose between two evils and avoid both harms.
من بعض. أنت أحيانا بتختار بين الشرين وتدفع المفسدتين. دلوقتي احنا عندنا وضعين كلاهما شر.
Now we have two situations, both evil and both harmful: a secularist implementing an Islamic constitution or a devout Muslim implementing a secular constitution. Which is better, a secularist implementing the Islamic constitution? Okay, a devout Muslim implementing it? Okay, pray for the Prophet, go ahead. A secularist implementing the Islamic constitution.
علماني يطبق الدستور الإسلامي. صلوا على النبي.
Pray for the Prophet, go ahead, you fool. Say no, that's an outside question. Okay, pray for the Prophet, now this.
طيب صلوا على النبي. الآن هذه الوثيقة تمام. السر فيها هو نصوص.
This document, the secret to its success lies in its texts and justice, not in those who implemented it. Yes, writing is easy, nothing is easier, but what about those who implemented it, if we say the secret to this?
الكتابة ما فيش أسهل منها. طيب في من طبقوها. لو قلنا إنه السر في نجاح هذه الوثيقة هو في نصوصها.
Document success is in its text, then we should choose an Islamic constitution, even if it's ruled by a secular leader. If we say the secret to this document's success is in those who implemented it, then we'll end up with a situation where we want an Islamic ruler even if the prevailing constitution is secular. So where have we arrived at? Now, laughter. Has anyone changed their mind? Has anyone changed their mind about what they said? Has anyone chosen a different option? But the truth is clear. But the truth is clear.
حد رجع حد اختار اختيار تاني. طيب إنما
Abu al-Muzaffar ruled accordingly. Look, my friends, let me clarify the picture for you: a law written professionally but the judge is corrupt, and a law not written professionally but the judge who will rule by it is righteous.
اعترافية لكن القاضي الذي سيحكم به صالح وعادل. تحب تقف أمام مين في أي تهمة تهمت بها؟
And just who would you prefer to stand before in any accusation you're charged with, even if it's the Constitution itself? Look, there's a rule among the jurists that says justice lies in the conscience of the judge, not in the letter of the law. Now, among Muslims, we don't have corrupt scholars. What does this corrupt scholar do? He uses
عالم السوء ده بيعمل ايه؟ مش بيستدل على السوء الذي يريد بنصوص من القرآن والسنة؟ صح ولا
texts
لا؟
from the Quran and Sunnah to justify his evil, right? He twists their meanings. Now, if you were the one to judge, if you were standing in a Sharia court with a corrupt scholar as the judge, and then you went to a secular civil court, but you knew that the one who judges with justice is a just and religious person, who would you prefer to?
قضاء مدني علماني لكن عارف الذي يقضي بالحق واحد معادل ومتدين.
Stand before, so my friends, is there a book better than the book of
أمام العادل. فيا جماعة
God the blessed and exalted? Is there a book after the book of God, a book wiser than it? There is. And yet the blessed and exalted said, and recite to them the story of him to whom we gave our signs, but he detached himself from them, so Satan pursued him, and he became of those who went astray. And
فانسلخ منها فأتبعه الشيطان فكان من الغاوين.
if we had willed, we could have elevated him thereby, but he clung to the earth and followed his own desires. So his example is like that of a dog, whether you chase it or leave it alone, it pants. Meanwhile, God, the blessed and exalted, and his prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, praised a man like the Negus in Ethiopia, although the
في الحبشة مع أنه كان حاكما مسلما ولكن يقضي بقانون مش إسلامي.
ruler was Muslim, he ruled according to a non-Islamic law, and the Sharia hadn't reached him. So, justice, or the essence of the matter, the deciding factor, the balance lies in the person of the ruler. A just and religious ruler is better for the
الحاكم العادل المتدين أفضل على الناس وعلى البلاد وعلى العباد حتى لو كان
people, the country, and the citizens, even if he applies a secular constitution. But a corrupt and wicked ruler is evil for the country, even if the constitution states that Islam is the state religion and Islamic law is the legislation. And of course, this issue, I think it's well
المسألة أظنها مشهورة. تجد الناس يهربون من البلاد التي
known. You find people fleeing from countries whose constitutions include a line saying their religion is Islam and their Sharia is Islamic law, to countries whose constitutions say we are secular and we have no religion, and so on. So we must understand that no matter how much we talk about the provisions of the
وضبط القانون فالأصل الفارق الميزان
law and its enforcement, the fundamental difference, the balance, lies in who applies this law. Okay, that's what I mean. I'm saying that if we choose, because life isn't always as we wish it to be, life isn't always as we wish it to be, you are always forced to choose between
الاختيار بين المنفعتين وبين المفسدتين. طيب يبقى أنا ذكرت الآن
benefits. Does anyone remember what they are? What they are? The first lesson is that Islamic Sharia is suitable for all societies, no matter what the societies are like. Her condition is deplorable. The second lesson
مزرية. الدرس الثاني هو
is, yes, the decisive factor and the scale are with the ruler, not in the text of the law. The third lesson, this document, my friends, is one of the things that sticks in the throats of secularists and enlightened modernists, because it proves that Islam is both religion and state.
صح. يعني يتمنى كل علماني يتمنى كل
Every secularist, every enlightened modernist, and every contemporary intellectual wishes that such a document didn't exist in Islam, because this document resembles the moment of the Hira migration and the establishment of the Islamic State. Islam is both religion and state, and this is one of the fundamental principles of Islam, that it exists within it if society is to be organized. Therefore, the resulting conclusion is that secularism is disbelief. Secularism meaning the exclusion of religion from
الدين من الحكم كفر.
governance is disbelief, and this is consistently stated in the Quran and Sunnah. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the disbelievers. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the wrongdoers. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiantly disobedient. Or have they prescribed for them a religion for which Allah has not given permission? Or do they have partners who prescribed for them a religion for which Allah has not given permission? Then is it the judgment of ignorance they seek? And who is better than God in judgment for people who are certain? And let him judge between them by what God has revealed. And do not follow their desires, and beware of them lest they tempt you away from some of what God has revealed to you. The only statement of the believers when they are called to God and his messenger to judge between them is that they say, "We hear and we obey." This means, and of course I understand, that there is comprehensive secularism and partial secularism, regardless of the meaning I am speaking under. Excluding Islam from governance is secularism, and secularism is disbelief, because the essence of Islam is that it is a state Therefore, Islamic jurisprudence if we disregard the jurisprudence of worship. But the rest of Islamic jurisprudence cannot exist except within a state. In fact, 4/5 of worship cannot exist except within a
يعني الإنسان يملك أن يصلي لكن المجتمع
state, that
المسلم
is, a person has the right to pray, but the Muslim community is required to establish mosques, build mosques, broadcast the call to prayer, maintain them, and appoint those who maintain the mosques and call the people to prayer. The difference between the Muslim community and those who apostatized during the time of our master Abu Bakr was the raising of the call to prayer and the establishment of rituals and prayer. And Ibn Taymiyyah, when he fought the Mongols, many people did not know the Mongols of Ibn Taymiyyah's time were Muslims or called themselves Muslims. They weren't infidels or pagans in Ibn Taymiyyah's time, but they were Muslims in name only. Their law was the Yasa, the law of Genghis Khan. So how did Ibn Taymiyyah view them? Yes, these people who see the Muslim as a text, I am like Judaism, music. This is extremely important.
اليهودي كغير هؤلاء ليسوا المسلمين. تمام؟ طيب ادي كده الدرس الرابع. الدرس الذي بعده، علشان انا هفقد تذكر الارقام بقى. الدرس الذي بعده وهو درس مهم في غاية الأهمية.
Pray for the Prophet now. The Islamic State. The Islamic State, its pillar is religion, its essence is religion, its idea is religion.
الدين جوهرها الدين فكرتها الدين. يعني إيه؟
What does that mean? Let me clarify the picture for you. Now, the state we live in, I mean the state of Egypt, Turkey, America, Britain, China, any state, I mean from the contemporary systems we live in. What is the essence of the state? What is the
التي نعيش فيها. ما هو جوهر الدولة؟ ما هو الأساس الذي تقوم عليه الدولة؟ تقوم على أساس
foundation upon which the state is based? It is based on one of two foundations, the foundation of race or the foundation of land. The foundation of race or the foundation of land. What does that mean? It means that there are countries that grant citizenship. Egypt, for example, or Turkey or any country grants citizenship to those born to
لمن ولد من أبوين مصريين أو من أبوين تركيين أو من
Egyptian parents or Turkish parents or whatever their parents may be. Sit down, Majda, or that's how it is. Race means that as long as this child acquires belonging to this state and the citizenship of this state as long as born to parents of the same nationality, that's what ethnicity is.
الأرض هناك دول ترى أن كل من ولد على
There are countries that believe everyone born on their soil deserves citizenship even if their parents are foreign. America is one example, although Trump now wants to change this law. Brazil is another, for example. Of course, you'll be aware of this. Argentina, generally speaking, there are countries that grant
الجنسية لمن ولد على أرضها.
citizenship to those born on their land. So how does the state's mindset and thinking work? My citizen has rights and obligations, but a foreigner who hasn't acquired
المواطن بتاعي له حقوق وواجبات. إنما الأجنبي الذي لم يكتسب المواطنة ليست له نفس الحقوق ولا نفس الواجبات.
Citizenship doesn't have the same rights or obligations as a citizen. For example, the simplest example, if I am an Egyptian or Turkish citizen or any other, I pay a certain amount of taxes and receive a certain amount of services.
وأحصل على قدر معين من الخدمات. لكن الأجنبي لا يدفع نفس القدر من الضرائب ولا
But a foreigner doesn't pay the same amount of taxes or receive the same amount of services. Let's say I want to run for president. One of the first requirements for candidacy is that the candidate be a citizen of that country. If a foreigner comes along and says, I want to run for president, would anyone
ينفع؟ حد بيقبل بكده؟ طيب.
accept that? So what's the point? The modern state is based on ethnicity or territory. Based on ethnicity and territory, the state differentiates between citizens and foreigners. For example, if someone has an accident in the street, the first thing we look at when we receive them
واحد حصلت له حادثة في الشارع. أول حاجة نبص فيها وإحنا بنستقبله في المستشفى الراجل ده أجنبي ولا مواطن؟
at the hospital is whether they are a foreigner or a citizen. A citizen might have health insurance and other benefits, and they might be subject to different spending and treatment. A non-citizen, on the other hand, would be subject to different spending and treatment. Similarly, if someone wants to study, is a student a citizen or a
ولا أجنبي؟ يبقى بناء على الدولة المعاصرة بناء على
foreigner? So, based on the modern state and based on the principle of ethnicity or territory, it differentiates between people in terms of rights and duties. The Islamic State is centered on religion, for example, if someone can
يعني مثلا كل إنسان يستطيع أن يقول أنا أريد اكتساب جنسية الدولة
say,
الإسلامية
I want to acquire the citizenship of the Islamic State. What do? They simply declare that there is no God but God and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. The state does not grant citizenship. The Islamic State does not grant citizenship. The individual is the one who can acquire this citizenship. If you went to America and said, I love America, would anyone give you
أنا أشهد أن أمريكا سيدة الكون. حد هيعبرني؟
citizenship? If you declared that America is the master of the universe, would anyone pay attention to you, or are there conditions that must be met? Each country sets its own criteria for granting citizenship. Islamic citizenship, it is not granted but rather acquired by those who desire it. Therefore, the rights and duties revolve around whether one is Muslim or not. Here, my friends, we find ourselves in a serious crisis with our brothers, some of whom are righteous and
في أزمة شديدة مع أخواننا وبعضهم من الصالحين الفضلاء الذين يقولون
virtuous who say that the Constitution of Medina established the right of citizenship. First, what does the right of citizenship mean? The right of citizenship, just a minute. Yes, the right of citizenship means that all citizens are equal in rights and duties. Yes, this is true, but in relation to
في الحقوق والواجبات. أيوة الكلام ده صح بس بالنسبة لمين؟ بالنسبة
whom, in relation to the state that speaks of citizens, the state whose foundation is ethnicity and whose foundation is land. All citizens have the same rights and the same duties. Okay, but the Muslim who has the same rights?
لكن المسلم الذي له نفس الحقوق ونفس الواجبات هم المسلمون. يعني مثلا
And the same duties is the Muslim. For example, let me give a simpler example of this matter. First question, forgive me, this is an important matter and cannot be summarized. God willing, we will discuss the issue of the right of citizenship and the difference between the right of citizenship in Islam and the right of citizenship in the modern state.
الحق المواطنة في الدولة الحديثة إن شاء الله نتناوله في المجلس القادم.
In the next session, I ask God Almighty to teach us what benefits us. May He benefit us with what He has taught us and increase our knowledge. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you, reviving a generation